Have you ever watched a man dig his own grave with a silver spoon? When a notoriously ruthless billionaire humiliated a quiet waitress over a spilled drop of wine, he sealed his own financial ruin. He demanded her fired immediately. He didn't know she owned the very floor he stood on. The crystal chandeliers of Le Rêve, the Michelin-starred dining room inside the legendary Hawthorne Grand Hotel, cast a warm, golden glow over the evening's elite clientele. To the untrained eye, Charlotte Kensington was just another face in the impeccably trained waitstaff. Dressed in the standard crisp white blouse, tailored black vest and silk tie, she moved with the practiced invisibility expected of high-end hospitality. She balanced a silver tray carrying 2 glasses of Dom Pérignon, her expression a mask of polite deference. No one in the dining room, not the Wall Street bankers celebrating their bonuses, nor the Hollywood producers hiding in the corner booths, knew that the 34-year-old woman pouring their sparkling water was worth a cool $1.2 billion. 3 months prior, Charlotte had finalized the acquisition of the Hawthorne Grand through a series of blind trusts and a quiet LLC. The historic property had been bleeding money, mismanaged by a bloated executive board and a disconnected management team. After selling her proprietary cybersecurity software to Palo Alto Networks, Charlotte had grown bored with Silicon Valley. She wanted a legacy asset. But before she fired the inept management, she needed to see the Orot for herself. So she hired herself as a waitress. "Table 4 needs their appetizers cleared, Charlotte," hissed Gregory, the floor manager. Gregory was a man perpetually shining with nervous sweat, his bespoke Armani suit fitting just a little too tightly around his waist. He ruled the dining floor through fear and sycophancy, bullying the junior staff while practically groveling at the feet of the wealthy patrons. "Right away, Gregory," Charlotte replied softly, keeping her eyes down. "And don't mess up table 9, Gregory added, grabbing her arm with entirely too much force. "That's Harrison Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Global Equities. He's dining with 2 senior partners from Sequoia Capital and a managing director from Goldman Sachs. If you breathe too heavily near his table, I will terminate you before you reach the kitchen doors. Understood?" "Understood," Charlotte said, gently but firmly pulling her arm from his grasp. She knew exactly who Harrison Caldwell was. In fact, Caldwell's aggressive investment firm had been trying to launch a hostile takeover of the Hawthorne Grand for the past year, hoping to buy the struggling debt before Charlotte swooped in and paid it off in cash. Caldwell was known in the financial world as a vulture, a man who bought distressed assets, fired the staff, stripped the copper from the walls, and sold the hollowed-out shells for a massive profit. He was ruthless, notoriously arrogant, and sitting right in her section. Charlotte approached table 9. Harrison Caldwell sat at the head, radiating an aura of unearned superiority. He wore a custom Tom Ford suit, and the heavy diamond-encrusted face of a Patek Philippe Nautilus peeked out from his French cuffs. He was loudly recounting a story about how he had dismantled a Midwestern manufacturing company, laughing as he described the CEO crying in the boardroom. The men from Sequoia and Goldman chuckled along, though their eyes looked strained. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Charlotte murmured, stepping perfectly into the service position. "May I present the wine?" She held a bottle of 1982 Chateau Margaux, a legendary vintage that ran roughly $4,500 a bottle on the restaurant's reserve list. She presented the label to Harrison, who didn't even bother to look up from his conversation. "Just open it, sweetheart." Harrison waved a dismissive hand. "And don't butcher the cork. It's older than you are, and significantly more valuable." Charlotte ignored the slight. With practiced, elegant motions, she removed the foil, inserted the corkscrew, and extracted the fragile cork without a single break. She poured a small tasting measure into Harrison's crystal Bordeaux glass. Harrison picked up the glass. He didn't swirl it. He didn't smell it. He simply threw it back like a cheap shot of tequila, frowned heavily, and slammed the delicate crystal back onto the table. A single tiny drop of the dark red liquid bounced out of the glass and landed on the pristine white tablecloth. "What is this?" Harrison demanded, his voice suddenly cutting through the ambient hum of the dining room. "The 1982 Chateau Margaux, sir," Charlotte replied evenly. "It's warm," he snapped. "It tastes like it's been sitting in the trunk of a Honda Civic. What temperature is your cellar?" "The reserve cellar is kept at precisely 55 degrees Fahrenheit, sir," Charlotte answered. She knew this for a fact. She had personally authorized the $50,000 repair to the HVAC system just 2 weeks ago. "Are you calling me a liar?" Harrison's voice rose, drawing the attention of the neighboring tables. The partners from Sequoia shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I know wine. I own a vineyard in Napa. This wine is ruined, and look at what you've done." He pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the single microscopic drop of wine on the tablecloth. "You're spilling it like a clumsy idiot." "I apologize if the temperature is not to your liking, Mr. Caldwell," Charlotte said, maintaining a steady, professional tone. "I would be happy to fetch the sommelier to decant a new—" "I don't want a new bottle from you," Harrison barked, slamming his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. "You're incompetent. Look at you. You're wearing a polyester uniform, serving men who make more in 5 minutes than you will in your entire, miserable, pathetic life. Who hired you? Do you have any idea who I am?" "Yes, sir. You are Harrison Caldwell," Charlotte said calmly, her emerald eyes locking onto his. There was no fear in her gaze, only a cold, calculating observation. "Don't look at me in the eye," Harrison sneered, leaning back in his chair. "Fetch your manager, now." Before Charlotte could even take a step back, Gregory was already there. The floor manager had practically sprinted across the dining room the moment Harrison's voice had risen above a conversational level. He arrived at table 9 panting, a sickly sweet smile plastered across his face. "Mr. Caldwell? Sir, is there a problem?" "I am so incredibly sorry," Gregory babbled, immediately pulling out a pristine linen napkin and dabbing at the microscopic red spot on the table as if it were a fatal wound. "The problem, Gregory, is this girl," Harrison sneered, not bothering to lower his voice. Half the restaurant was openly staring now. "She serves a $5,000 bottle of wine like a high school dropout pouring tap water at a diner. She ruined the presentation, she spilled it on the table, and then she had the audacity to talk back to me." Gregory turned to Charlotte, his face purple with rage. "Charlotte, what is wrong with you? Apologize to Mr. Caldwell this instant." "I performed the standard wine service, Gregory," Charlotte said quietly. "The bottle is in perfect condition." "Shut up," Gregory hissed, stepping closer to her. "You do not contradict a VIP. Mr. Caldwell, I will have this bottle comped immediately. I'll personally retrieve a 1990 Romanée Conti from the owner's private reserve to replace it on the house." Harrison scoffed, adjusting his cuffs. "A free bottle doesn't fix the absolute trash you have working the floor. It ruins the appetite. It ruins the atmosphere. This hotel used to mean something. Now, it's a joke. But that's going to change very soon." Harrison leaned forward, a smug, predatory grin spreading across his face. He looked at the investors from Sequoia and Goldman Sachs, clearly playing to his audience. "You see, gentlemen," Harrison boasted loudly, "the reason the service here is so abysmal is because the ownership is weak. The Hawthorne Grand is drowning in debt. Some anonymous buyer scooped it up a few months ago, trying to play real estate mogul. But they are bleeding cash. I have a meeting tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. with the holding company that represents the new owner. I'm going to make them a low-ball offer they literally cannot refuse. I'm buying this hotel." Gregory's eyes widened in awe. "Mr. Caldwell, that would be incredible news for the property." "Yes, it will," Harrison said, his eyes flicking back to Charlotte with cruel intent. "And my first order of business as the new owner will be to clean house. But I don't want to wait until tomorrow to start. Gregory, if you want to prove that this management team has any value to me when I take over, you will fire this insolent little girl right now." Charlotte stood perfectly still. The dining room had gone dead silent. The only sound was the faint classical music playing over the hidden speakers. "Mr. Caldwell, please, she's just a server," one of the Goldman Sachs partners muttered, looking deeply uncomfortable with the public cruelty. "It's about standards, David," Harrison snapped back. "If you let the bottom feeders think they have dignity, they start acting like they belong in the room with us. They don't. Fire her, Gregory, or I walk out that door, take my capital with me, and tell every connection I have in Manhattan that the Hawthorne Grand is officially dead." Gregory didn't even hesitate. The panic of losing a high-profile guest, combined with the sudden revelation that Harrison Caldwell might soon be signing his paychecks, made the decision for him. He turned to Charlotte, his face completely devoid of empathy. "You heard the man. Give me your apron, Charlotte. You are terminated, effective immediately. Pack your locker and leave through the service elevator. I'll have security escort you out to make sure you don't steal any silverware on your way." Charlotte looked at Gregory. For 3 weeks, she had watched him steal premium cuts of Wagyu beef from the kitchen, verbally abuse the immigrant dishwashers, and falsify his time cards. She had compiled a thick dossier on him in her office upstairs. "Are you sure you want to do this, Gregory?" Charlotte asked. Her voice wasn't shaking. It was chillingly calm. "Don't you dare threaten me," Gregory hissed. "Take off the apron." Charlotte reached behind her back, untying the knot of her black service apron. She folded it neatly over her arm. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply looked at Harrison Caldwell, who was swirling his replacement glass of water with a look of supreme triumph. "You are making a very large mistake, Mr. Caldwell," Charlotte said softly, but her voice carried. "Both in your assessment of this hotel and in your belief that you will ever own it." Harrison threw his head back and laughed. "Security! Get this pathetic trash out of my sight. Go find another minimum wage job, sweetheart. Maybe try a drive-through. It suits your pedigree." Charlotte set the folded apron gently onto the edge of table 9. She gave Gregory one last, pitying look, then turned and walked out of the dining room, her head held high. As she walked through the swinging doors into the chaotic kitchen, the sounds of Harrison's laughter faded behind her. She didn't head down to the basement locker room. Instead, she walked past the bewildered chefs, bypassed the service elevators, and stepped into the private executive elevator. She pressed her thumb against the biometric scanner hidden beneath the panel. The button for the penthouse suites lit up. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. Harrison Caldwell thought he was meeting a desperate holding company representative at 10 a.m. to steal her hotel. Charlotte smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. She needed to pick out a very nice suit. The following morning, the Manhattan skyline was obscured by a heavy, gray mist. But inside the Pinnacle boardroom, on the 45th floor of the Hawthorne Grand, The atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The room was a masterclass in corporate intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass windows, a massive table carved from a single slab of reclaimed mahogany, and ergonomic leather chairs that cost more than most cars. At 9:45 a.m., Harrison Caldwell strode through the double doors, flanked by his chief operating officer, William Bradley, and his lead acquisitions attorney, Jonathan Hayes. Harrison looked like a man who had already won the war. He wore a charcoal grey bespoke suit, a fresh silk tie, and an expression of unrestrained smugness. "Look at this place," Harrison scoffed, tossing his Italian leather briefcase onto the mahogany table. He walked over to the window, gazing down at the bustling streets below. "It's a dinosaur, William. The woodwork is dated, the layout is inefficient, and the staff is a complete liability. Once we get the keys, I want the top 3 floors gutted. We'll convert them into ultra-luxury penthouses and sell them to foreign tech investors. We'll make our money back on the real estate alone." William, a tall, perpetually anxious man, holding a thick binder of financial projections, nodded quickly. "Assuming the holding company accepts the $150 million offer, sir, it is frankly insulting. The property alone is appraised at over $300 million. "They're desperate, William," Harrison sneered, turning away from the window. "They bought a sinking ship, and they are drowning in the hotel's legacy debt. My inside guys at JP Morgan assure me they are bleeding liquid capital. They will take the $150 million, and they will thank me for tossing them a life preserver. Today is a formality." At exactly 9:55 a.m., the boardroom doors opened again. A man in his late 50s, wearing a conservative, perfectly tailored navy suit, stepped into the room. He carried a single, slim leather portfolio. Harrison immediately recognized him. It was Arthur Penhaligon, a senior managing partner at Skadden, Arps, Slate, Maher and Flom, one of the most ruthless and prestigious corporate law firms on the globe. Harrison's confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Why was a Skadden senior partner representing a desperate, anonymous holding company? "Mr. Caldwell," Arthur said, his voice a smooth, emotionless baritone. He did not offer his hand. He simply walked to the left side of the table and opened his portfolio. "Thank you for being punctual." "Arthur, I didn't realize you were slumming it in hotel acquisitions," Harrison replied, trying to project a relaxed authority. He sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs. "Let's skip the pleasantries. My time is incredibly valuable. Where is the principal? Let's get these papers signed so I can start firing the rest of the incompetent staff downstairs." "The principal owner of the Hawthorne Grand is arriving now," Arthur replied, checking his platinum Patek Philippe. The heavy mahogany doors opened for a third and final time. Harrison Caldwell leaned back, steepling his fingers, ready to deliver a crushing opening monologue to whoever walked through that door. But the words died in his throat. His jaw actually dropped, his eyes widening in a mixture of absolute confusion and rising, irrational anger. Walking into the room was the waitress from Table 9. Charlotte Kensington did not look like a waitress today. She was dressed in a razor-sharp, custom-tailored Tom Ford pantsuit in midnight blue. Her hair, previously tied back in a standard hospitality bun, now fell in sleek waves around her shoulders. A vintage Cartier Panthère watch gleamed quietly on her wrist. She radiated a cold, undeniable power that instantly sucked the oxygen out of the boardroom. She didn't look angry. She didn't look vindictive. She looked bored. "What kind of sick joke is this?" Harrison demanded, slamming his hands flat on the table and rocketing to his feet. He turned furiously to Arthur. Is this a stunt? Because if this is some kind of negotiation tactic, it's pathetic. Get this girl out of here before I call security myself." Charlotte walked calmly to the head of the table. She pulled out the main chair, sat down, and crossed her legs. She looked at Harrison with the same pitying expression she had given him the night before. "Sit down, Harrison," Charlotte commanded. She didn't yell. She didn't raise her voice. But the absolute authority in her tone made Harrison's COO, William, instantly drop into his chair as if his strings had been cut. "I will not be spoken to like this by a fired minimum-wage tray pusher," Harrison shouted, his face flushing crimson. "Jonathan, pack up the briefcases. We are leaving. The deal is completely off the table. Let this entire miserable building go into foreclosure." "The building cannot go into foreclosure, Harrison," Charlotte said smoothly, opening a manila folder Arthur slid toward her. "Because there is no debt." Harrison froze, halfway through grabbing his briefcase. "What? When my LLC acquired the Hawthorne Grand 3 months ago, I didn't assume the debt. I liquidated it," Charlotte explained, her emerald eyes locking onto his. "All $400 million of it, paid in full, cash wire. The hotel is completely unencumbered. We aren't bleeding capital. We are sitting on one of the most profitable, debt-free real estate assets in Manhattan." Harrison stared at her, his mind struggling to process the impossible information. You're a waitress." "I am Charlotte Kensington," she corrected softly. "Founder and former CEO of Aegis Cyber Defense. I sold my company to Palo Alto Networks last year for $1.2 billion. I bought this hotel because I love its history. I was working the floor to audit my management team from the ground up." She paused, a small razor-sharp smile playing on her lips. "I must say, the audit was incredibly illuminating, especially last night." Harrison collapsed back into his chair, the blood draining from his face. The cocky, aggressive vulture capitalist was suddenly gone, replaced by a man realizing he had just stepped onto a landmine. His lawyer, Jonathan, looked physically ill. "So," Harrison stammered, trying desperately to salvage his pride, "you tricked me. You set up this meeting just to gloat? To humiliate me over a spilled drop of wine? That's incredibly petty, Miss Kensington." "I don't do petty, Harrison. I do business," Charlotte replied, leaning forward. "And you are right. The service at my hotel last night was unacceptable, which is why I've called someone else to join us." Charlotte pressed a button on the intercom console embedded in the table. "Send him in." A moment later the door opened, and Gregory, the floor manager, walked in. He looked nervous, clutching his clipboard tightly. When he saw Harrison Caldwell sitting at the table, a wide, sycophantic smile broke out across his sweaty face. "Ah, Mr. Caldwell. Good morning, sir." Gregory practically bowed. "I wasn't told you were up here. I assume you're signing the paperwork today." "Excellent news. Just excellent." Gregory then turned his gaze to the head of the table. He blinked, his brain short-circuiting as he registered Charlotte, sitting there in a designer suit. "Charlotte? What in the world are you doing here? How did you get past security? Mr. Caldwell, I assure you I fired her last night." "You did, Gregory," Charlotte said. "And as the owner of this hotel, I am officially reversing that termination. Instead, I am terminating you." Gregory's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on a dock. "Owner? You?" Charlotte slid a thick, bound dossier across the mahogany table. "This is a detailed log of your activities over the last 3 weeks. Embezzlement of premium inventory from the kitchen, falsifying employee time cards to skim overtime pay, and a documented history of verbal abuse toward the immigrant support staff. My lawyers have already forwarded a copy to the NYPD. Gregory went pale, his knees visibly shaking. "Security is waiting in the hall, Gregory," Charlotte said, her voice dropping to a glacial chill. "They will escort you to your locker, and then to the street. You have 5 minutes." Gregory looked wildly between Charlotte and Harrison, hoping for a savior. Harrison looked away. Gregory turned and practically ran out of the boardroom, the door clicking shut behind him. The boardroom plunged into a heavy, suffocating silence. Harrison cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. He was thoroughly beaten, but his ego refused to let him submit completely. "Well," Harrison said, forcing a tight, unnatural chuckle. "A dramatic display, Miss Kensington. You've made your point. You played undercover boss, you caught a bad manager, and you got to rub my nose in it. Bravo. But my time is money. Since you clearly aren't selling the hotel, we have no further business here. William, Jonathan, let's go." "Sit down, Harrison," Charlotte repeated. This time, it wasn't a request. It was an executioner's command. Harrison hesitated, then slowly sank back into his leather chair. "What now? Going to ask me to apologize for the wine?" "I don't care about the wine," Charlotte said, interlacing her fingers on the table. "I care about your aggressive, predatory business model. You've spent the last 12 months actively trying to sabotage this hotel's reputation in the press to drive down the acquisition price. You planted false stories about health code violations in the Wall Street Journal. You paid off a food critic to give Le Rêve a scathing review last quarter." Harrison's lawyer, Jonathan, finally spoke up, his voice trembling. "Miss Kensington, those are baseless defamatory accusations. If you have no proof—" "Arthur," Charlotte interrupted gently, not even looking at the lawyer. Arthur Penhaligon opened his portfolio again and slid 3 separate manila folders across the vast table. They landed perfectly in front of Harrison. "Those are the wire transfer receipts from your shell company in the Cayman Islands to the journalist, the critic, and the former hotel inspector," Charlotte said. "It took my cybersecurity team exactly 4 hours to trace the crypto wallets back to your personal IP address at your estate in the Hamptons." Harrison stared at the documents, his breath growing shallow. "What do you want?" he whispered, the arrogance finally, entirely stripped from his voice. "You want to sue me? Fine. Tie me up in court for 5 years, or I have better lawyers." "I don't want to sue you, Harrison. Lawsuits are tedious." Charlotte smiled, and it was a terrifying expression. "I told you last night that you were making a large mistake. You assumed I was vulnerable. But you are the one who is over-leveraged." She pulled a final piece of paper from her folder. 3 weeks ago, Caldwell Global Equities took a massive position shorting a biotech startup. That startup just got FDA approval 2 days ago. Your stock tanked. To cover your margin calls, you took out a $250 million mezzanine loan from Deutsche Bank. It was a bridge loan, high interest, incredibly risky, backed by your own personal assets. Your Hamptons house, your Napa vineyard, your equity in your own firm. Harrison was visibly trembling now. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "How do you know that? That is strictly confidential." "Because, Harrison," Charlotte leaned forward, her emerald eyes piercing straight through him, "I bought that debt at 8 a.m. this morning." A strangled gasp escaped William, the COO. Harrison simply stared, completely paralyzed. "You owed Deutsche Bank," Charlotte explained softly. "Now you owe me. And according to the covenants of that specific loan, which my friend Arthur here reviewed very carefully, any evidence of corporate malfeasance or criminal fraud, such as bribing health inspectors to manipulate real estate prices, triggers an immediate default clause. You wouldn't, Harrison croaked, his voice barely audible. It would ruin me. It would liquidate my entire firm. You sat at my table last night, Charlotte said, her voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper. You treated me like garbage. You treated my staff like garbage. You boasted about destroying companies and making people cry in boardrooms just like this one. You destroy livelihoods for sport, Harrison. You are a parasite. She stood up, buttoning the single button of her Tom Ford jacket. I am calling the loan due, Charlotte declared, her voice ringing with finality. You have 30 days to produce $250 million in liquid cash, or I am seizing your assets, tearing your firm down to the studs and selling the copper wire inside your walls. Harrison sat perfectly still, a man completely broken, staring at the ruins of his empire scattered on the mahogany table. Arthur will handle the paperwork, Charlotte said, turning toward the door. Oh, and Harrison, one last thing. She paused with her hand on the brass doorknob and looked back over her shoulder. You are permanently banned from the Hawthorne Grand. Security will escort you out through the service elevator. I suggest you don't steal any silverware on your way out. Charlotte opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, leaving the billionaire sitting in silence, choking on the bitter, metallic taste of his own absolute destruction. True wealth doesn't shout. It observes quietly from the shadows. Harrison Caldwell thought he was untouchable, using his money as a weapon to crush those he deemed beneath him. He never realized that the most dangerous power is the kind you never see coming. Arrogance is a heavy debt, and eventually, karma comes to collect. If you loved this story of ultimate billionaire revenge, hit that like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe for more dramatic stories of karma served ice cold.